Thank you. Well, hey, good morning, everybody. Good morning. It's an absolute honor to be here and to share with all of you. And like Barry shared, I'm on staff here at ECC as Pastor of Leadership Development. My passion is really to help people in general, but especially leaders to grow and to go further. I also am really passionate about coming alongside organizations, churches, and helping them reach their fullest potential that the kingdom of God has called them to be. And so my hope today is just to invest in you. As we get started, though, I just have a few questions for you. I want to know who I'm talking to. So I know some of the people in the room, but I don't know everyone. So this will really help me as I am going through this process of explaining the change process. So how many senior leaders or pastors in the room? All right, we have a few. How many are on staff in a minute at a church? All right, keep your hands up. You guys are like this, and I'm like, I was serious. I really wanted. Okay, who else? Who's like is in a nonprofit ministry or something along those lines? Yeah. Okay, great. And any missionaries? All right, we have a few of you. How many people are? I did not mention you attend the church and you're just interested in showing up. Yeah. That's good. Is there anybody I missed? Marketplace? Do we have marketplace leaders here? Okay, we have some of those as well. Awesome. Well, that's exciting. Thank you, Jim. So, just so you all know, what I'm going to share today applies actually to each and every one of you. Most of my illustrations will be from the church. But if you if you lead a business, if you're part of a business in a marketplace, if you're part of a ministry, if you're a missionary, if you attend a church, this is one thing we all know: change actually happens to everybody. Most people say that they don't like change. I actually don't believe that people don't like change because I've never met somebody that doesn't like new countertops or a brand new car. Right? So the reality is we just don't like change when we're not the ones that initiated it and get the choice of how it goes. So that's really the truth about things. But there's important things we need to understand about change. And so I'm going to speak from the place of organizational change and organizational development. But this applies to all organizations, but as well, it actually applies to society in general. And I'll hit on that a little bit. But so the main thing that I want you to get out of this first conversation is that when we talk about changes within an organization, so that could be anything as big as the change in who's leading to minor things. One of the things we just went through a change here at Effort Community Church was though we've done it many, many times through the history of this church, we just added a second service on Sunday morning. And so that's a minor change. But it is a change, and those types of things actually, those changes, we see the same things happen over and over again. I believe if you understand what happens in a change process, your ability to lead and navigate through it, and actually lead yourself and navigate through it, will increase your ability for your organization to change healthily, but also allow your organization or your ministry or your business to change in a way where they're able to be adaptive. So the field of study that this is actually out of is both transformational leadership, which is meaning the transformation of an organization. I define transformational leadership as any organization, leading any organization to become who God intended them to be. That's how I define it. Adaptive leadership is actually leading an organization so that it can be flexible and change and respond to either external or internal pressures as they're moving through the transformational process. Maybe I just lost everybody. But adaptive leadership is super important. I got my best skills in leading in adaptive leadership actually in 2020. And anybody else who led anything in 2020 did as well, because if you didn't have we had an external pressure for change into our organizations, sometimes 3 times a day. I got to the point where I still have PTSD anytime a governor gets on the TV. Right? So, but this stuff applies to that season. It's going to apply to you. All right, I'm going to get started here. Y'all good? All right. Is it awake? Matt, I'm trying. I'm hitting the big button. Oh, there it is. All right. I gave you some slides this morning and the notes, so you can take notes if you want, or you can just listen as I talk. But here's the thing we need to understand. This first talk, if you get this, I'm happy. Every change in any organization or ministry means that someone has lost something. This is so important that we understand this as leaders, because often, myself included, if I'm initiating a change, I'm usually super excited about it. In fact, I'm usually making the change because I think it's going to lead us to something better. And it's going to make us more effective. It's going to make us more effective to reach lost people or to do what we do better, or more efficient financially, whatever it may be. And so I'm excited about the change. And we can sometimes not realize that when we initiate a change, somebody in the organization, multiple people within the organization, are losing something. Simple thing, come back to us adding a service on Sunday morning. People already are saying to me, I heard this already this week, only our second week, man, I'm not seeing people I'm used to seeing on Sunday morning. They lost something. And one of the things that we don't realize as leaders, as we think about that, is that, all right, Matt, I'm struggling here. There it is that we have a tendency to think organizationally, not emotionally. So I don't know about you, I'm guilty of this. I will think as a change is coming, or as I'm putting into a change, I will think about all of the details that need to happen within the organization. What needs to be in place, what policies or processes need to be in place. I don't think about the emotional process that people are going to go through. And the reason why this is so important, folks, is because those of us, especially in ministry, we are called to pastor people. We have to pastor people through change. And what we don't understand is as we move through an organizational change, the emotions of people and helping people process and move through the change emotionally is actually what leads to a thriving change and actually allows a change to be most effective. So I'm going to help you this morning think emotionally. Now, why do we need to have change in our churches, in our ministries, in our businesses? I think that Jim Collins said it the best in How the Mighty Fall, where he says, as soon as an organization fails to distinguish between why they exist and what they do to exist, they fossilize, that should be a they, not the. They fossilize around current practices and set themselves up for decline. So what he's saying is, and this is every church that I've ever worked with that is struggling to stay as a thriving organization, the what they do, you know, whether it be have services at this time or disciple people at this time, you know, have Sunday school or have small groups or have this favorite outreach we do every single year. I helped one church. They were famous, bless you, they were famous for having an Easter egg hunt every year, right? And that Easter egg hunt was more important than even why they were doing the Easter egg hunt. In fact, the goal of the Easter egg hunt was to pull it off every year. Right? As opposed to the why, which was originally to help reach families and children within the community for Jesus. But what Collins says is as soon as we fossilize, as soon as we become so focused on what we do, rather than the purpose for why we do it, we're actually setting ourselves up for a decline. And so if we keep the why in front of us, the most important things in front of us, that's always going to drive change. Because the why we do is going to require us to change, to flex, to do different things. You understand what I'm saying? Because the world changes. I share with churches as I have the blessing and opportunity to coach pastors in churches. If you're still doing things the same way you did them in 2007, then you're dying. The world changed rapidly in 2007. Who knows what happened in 2007? The iPhone. It changed the world. It changed everything. And if you're doing things the same way as you did then, you are behind the eight ball. In fact, I would say if you're doing the same things that you were doing in 2020, you're behind because it changed everything. And so we have these outside factors, but we also have this inside drive of what God's calling us to do, how He's calling us to be great ministries and lead organizations and businesses that actually fulfill our kingdom purpose. And so we need to focus on the why, and that's going to lead us to change. Now the problem is that as we change, people experience pain because they lost something. Yeah? And so we have a tendency, because nobody likes pain. Who enjoys pain? All right, that was nobody. All right, good. Pain is not to be avoided, but accompanied. So what I mean by that is that pain in our process of change is something that we can't avoid. And this is what happens. This is what happens to me as a leader. People begin to complain because they're experiencing the loss. And you know what I want to do when people start knocking on my door or sending me emails or anything like that to experience the loss? I want to say, these people are stiff-necked. They don't understand what we're trying to do. They don't understand the gospel. I'm going to go and play golf and turn my phone off. Yeah? Because I want to avoid it. I want to avoid their pain. To be quite honest and authentic with you, sometimes I want to avoid my own pain. Right? I want to think about it. I was actually brought up to avoid my own pain. Right? Rub some dirt on it and get moving. Right? Rather than actually sit in what it was. But as pastors, as leaders, as shepherds, as Christians, we're actually supposed to come alongside people and accompany them through the pain. That is the shepherding process. And so as we do that, let's walk through what the change process looks like. Transitions or changes have 3 parts. And we're just going to walk through this quite simply. The slides that you have in your handouts are going to look a little bit different because I wanted just to kind of give a better picture of this process. But the words will be the same and you'll be able to take notes just the same. First and foremost, the first part of a transition is that every transition begins with an ending. You're like, wow, that's really profound, Dan. But it's the truth, right? In order for there to be a change or a transition, something has ended. And so if there's an ending, then there's a primary emotion that goes with this. And I've already talked about this. The primary emotion that comes with an ending is grief. And so once again, as a leader, you're going to have to understand that the people in your ministries or in your churches or in your businesses, they're going to be grieving something. Even good changes, even great changes, even kingdom changes are going to bring grief to people. And you know the 5 stages of grief, right? There's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And you're going to see all of those. Now, they may not seem the same as someone when they've lost a loved one or something like that, but they're going to experience some of those things. Denial would be someone that comes up to you and says, I don't understand why we have to do this. Right? There's anger. I remember the first time I was in the church leading and I was in charge of discipleship ministries, and we made a decision that we were no longer going to do Sunday school on Sunday morning, but we were going to shift to small groups, right? And because of that, and the reason was we needed to add a service on Sunday morning, and the Sunday school hour just had to go. And so the Sunday after that happened, a wonderful, wonderful woman who was many years my senior came up to me walking up the aisles, and I saw her coming, and as the closer that she got, her finger came out. And it started shaking. And she walked up to me and she's like, you ruined my church. Right? That's pain. That's anger. Who's it at? Me. That's grief. So I can either say, well, she doesn't understand what she's talking about. I can turn and run away. I can pretend I got a phone call. All of those things we could do. Or I can learn to accompany her in that and help her process the fact that, yes, she lost something, name the loss, but also invite her into what God's going to be doing through it, right? So this is what I'm going to talk you through. The reason why this is so important is because I love what Todd Bolsinger says, or I'm sorry, it's actually Heitz and Lindsay in their books about adaptive leadership. They say leadership is disappointing people at a rate they can absorb. Leaders in the room, how many? Right? That's what it is. It's disappointing people at a rate they can absorb, because if you're leading, you're changing. And if you're changing, people are grieving. You with me? This is making sense. And so listen, and what I'm not trying to do, I hope you all hear my heart in this. I'm not trying to make the people we're leading into these bad people. They're not. They're human beings. And their souls and their people we're called to shepherd. But the reality is we have to understand what they're going through so that we can lead them through change better. Because if we lead through change better, our ministries actually will be more effective. Our businesses will be more effective. And so leadership at the rate they can absorb. And I would add to them, actually, leadership is disappointing people at a rate you can absorb. Friends, if you're not understanding this change process within yourself, and if you don't have the resilience to deal with the people's responses, what you're going to end up doing, and I've seen this time and time again as well, as leaders initiate a change, they crumble under the pressure and the weight of the change process, and then they back away from the change. What often happens in those situations is actually they lose all of the people that bought into the change. And the people that actually push against the change are happy. The people that bought into the change, that actually joined whatever God was doing because they were excited about God's movement, actually end up pulling away from the ministry, pulling away from the church. And the churches decline because guess who ends up leading the church? No longer the leadership or the pastor or God's vision, but instead it's the loudest, squeakiest people that don't have the ability to bear the grief. Right? And so we have to grow, we have to learn how to do this because leadership comes down to us being able to disappoint people at a rate we can absorb and a rate that they can absorb. We have to remember, and you need to remember, you, friends, are the thermostat of the church during change. So you cannot lead to a place beyond where the church can handle, beyond what you can handle. So if you're leading a business, ministry, base in a mission, whatever it is, if you're not able to absorb it, if you're not able to handle it, no, you can't expect anybody else to. You're the thermostat. You are the temperature setter. And so understanding this stuff, processing this stuff, actually makes a huge difference. So that's grief. And as everybody's processing the grief, you move into this place called the neutral zone. And friends, this is the most important part of the change process. The primary emotion during the neutral zone is anxiety. And anxiety is really just our emotional response to a perceived threat. It's really what it is. And so how do we respond to anxiety or to threats? Well, we know physiologically we respond with fight or flight. Yeah? Sometimes the third one is freeze. So as a police officer, we were trained to never flee or to freeze. We were usually taught to fight, but our goal as a police officer was actually to allow ourselves to to get into a biological conversation, not to let the lower recesses of our brain, right, the back of our brain that actually is that part, and actually lead with our frontal cortex. That's a process that we have to go through. But as leaders, that means that we actually have to lead from a place where we are centered in what God's called us to do and actually process the emotions, be able to raise up above them and lead that way rather than respond and react to our emotions. And it's tough because anxiety is a thing. It's a huge thing. And anxiety shows up in churches and in people in multiple ways. The way that we often see this is that people react to anxiety. First of all, they start conflicts. Right? That shows up in the conflict. The freezing sometimes or the fleeing shows up in people withdraw or they distance. So you'll see sometimes when you do a change, people will pull back from ministry. Some people will leave the church because they don't have the ability to manage the anxiety. Another thing that people do when there's a highly anxious area of the ministry is sometimes they will triangle. And what does triangling mean? Triangling is when people cannot handle the pressure, so they go to a third party. Right? And so rather than to come to you with the issue that they have with the change, they go to one of the people on your staff if you're the senior pastor. Or if you're not the senior pastor, maybe they go to you, or they don't talk to you on staff. You know, somebody's having a problem with the way the things change in children's ministry, and so they talk to each other rather than you. Or they go to an elder on your elder board that they know that they'll have a listening ear from, right? In all of these ways, so they'll triangle each other. If you are a parent with more than one child, you have been triangled. I promise you. So the other thing that people do during highly anxious times is they will overfunction or underfunction. So overfunctioning means that some people will absorb the anxiety and they will do everything that they possibly can. And they will lead more than they can, and they'll actually break their own limits to lead. The dangerous thing about overfunctioners in churches is often we see them as leaders. Friends, can I share with you the number of churches that I work with that are in decline where the elder board's full of overfunctioners? They're not leaders, they're actually the most anxious people in the church. But we've identified them as leaders because they stepped up and filled gaps because they were overfunctioning out of their anxiety. They actually weren't leading. So we have to be able to see that in people. And the other side is underfunctioners. Underfunctioners are just people that aren't performing to the level that they are. This is the reason why when you have a change, sometimes there's distancers, but sometimes there's people that were stars, that were the people you could rely on, that actually pull back from ministry, or they say they need a break or whatever, and they actually move to a place where they're not able to handle the level of change, and they become people that actually do less than they're actually created or able to do. They underfunction in their capacity. So this is all the things that happen during anxiety. Isn't this fun? But here's the cool thing. Here's the cool thing about the neutral zone. It's the area of highest anxiety with any change process, but at the same time, if you're a leader and you know how to do it, you can leverage the anxiety because it's the highest place in organizational time where creativity can just skyrocket. If you don't believe me, how the church, being the least adaptive organization on the face of the earth, I think sometimes. Look at how the church adapted in 2020. Churches that couldn't change times on their service times, no matter what, because of the people, were able to change it in a day. Churches that were never able to launch online ministries, launched online ministries in 4 weeks, or 4 days, or 24 hours. Right? I mean, we adapted in so many ways during the pandemic because the pressure was so high, we had to. And we had to leverage the anxiety toward creativity because the mission was so important. Yeah? And so we can do it. And your people can do it. No matter how big the change is, how small the change is, there is creativity. So you as a leader need to learn how to do something. It's called going to the balcony. This is not something new with me, but this is regularly going up to the 10,000-foot view, whatever it may be, and looking at the big picture, being able to see beyond the emotional responses, looking at where and getting alone with the Lord in the secret place, making sure you're hearing His voice, where He's calling you, looking at the big picture. Don't get stuck down into the trenches and only the places where you're blinded or overwhelmed by all of the emotions, and continue to be able to see what God's doing. Go back to the vision of why you started the change and be able to invite people into creative solutions to their anxiety. Because it is an incredible place. If you can learn as a leader how to see every single problem as the potential for a solution rather than a potential of a crisis, you will lead an adaptive organization. And it's so important. And so we have to realize that all this anxiety is actually, we can leverage people's emotions rather to go towards the struggles and the emotions that they're having, and we can leverage that, all of that energy toward creativity and creative solutions. And how do you do that? You ask questions. You learn the art of asking questions. Wow, it really sounds like you're having a hard time with this change. What's that about? Well, it sounds like this is very difficult for you, and I can hear that you've lost something in this, and it seems like you're really angry with me. Is that true? Well, do you understand why we're doing this? Yes. Okay, so if you know why we're making this change, then let me ask you a question. How best can we do this so that we can fulfill the mission? And what people will do is they'll start to give you ideas you haven't thought of. What people will do is actually begin to name the exact change that you're trying to lead. But we have to but if we don't understand this process, we become reactive rather than accompanying people in the anxiety. Is this making sense? I hope so. So as we move through the anxiety, now I want you all to know we're going to focus on this centerpiece, this neutral zone, the whole second talk. So just know that, because this is a whole art of leading change, but we're going to go just through the change process through this first talk. And finally, we move to the final stage of a change process, which is the new beginning. Yay! And the primary emotion in a new beginning is hope. People begin to catch the vision. They believe that God could do more. They see what's actually going to happen, and they are invited in. And so I want to be clear, though, this process is linear, and I presented it in a linear fashion, but the reality is it's not always that way. Like, you can be here, and then all of a sudden you kind of see these things creep up again, you know. You may have 80% of your church here, but you still have 20% here. Right? But it's helpful to present it this way. But the most important thing I want you to see through this is that we can't always think just organizationally in a change. We also need to think emotionally and recognize we are leading people. And if we don't understand this process, what we will do is we will avoid helping people rather than accompanying people through this. And we'll miss the opportunity of the neutral zone. And we will actually move into the new beginning on our own. Early on in my ministry, I tried to do some changes because I'm just wired to change things weekly. Ask my wife. And you know, one of the things I convinced myself of was because I have a little bit of charisma and I have a winsome personality, I can honestly convince people of anything I felt. And what would happen was we would move into the new beginning and we would move into the brand new stage. And then we would be about a year down the road and I started to see people present the anxiety. I thought we were kicking at all cylinders, and then I had people that were under-functioning or people that were leaving. Or there would be little conflicts that would sneak up, right? And I'd be like, what is this about? Like, I'm like 40 yards down, and you all are still at the first yard line, right? Like, I just didn't understand it because I didn't understand the process. And I actually thought, well, if the organization is moving this way and the people seem to be, that everything's fine. But the problem was I never stopped to actually accompany my people through these things. And the number of change processes that I enacted that ended up blowing up in my face made me go back to look at, all right, how do we do this and how do I shepherd people through this?